Mortal Kombat, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Fortnite. Whenever people think of those games, mainly one thing comes to mind: violence. They think that the games are inherently violent, and they think that they make the people who play them more violent. But what actually causes violence? Some people say anger. Some people say it's mental illness. But some actually say it's violent video games. And although this belief is held by many, according to my research, it cannot be further from the truth. So my first point of research on this topic was that the average person can separate violence they see in video games from that of real life. The research that I read calls this separating fantasy from reality. A New York Times op-ed article titled "It's Perverse, but It's Pretend" talks about this topic, saying that teenagers can separate the idea of fantasy from reality in video games when they're playing them, with the violence that they see in video games being completely separate from violence they might see in real life. This survey was also done with middle schoolers, and with the same result. They asked the middle schoolers who said they played video games whether they thought that the violence that they were seeing in those games was affecting them in any way mentally, and they universally said no. Although the violence within these video games can be gruesome, it is clearly fake and separate from any real violence they might see. Speaking as someone who's been playing video games my entire life, I do not think that violence in video games has affected me in any way. I do not think video games have turned me into a violent person whatsoever. In fact, I would say I'm a very non-violent person. And I have many friends who've grown up playing video games who I would also say are very non-violent people. Video games are a means of relieving stress, not a means of being a violent activity whatsoever. My second point of research on this topic is that the youth crime rate in America has actually gone down significantly since the popularity of violent video games. According to the YouTube video, "Do Video Games Cause Violence? It's Complicated," by the popular YouTube channel Game Theory, the youth crime rate in America has been steadily going down since the popularity of video games. Now, I know the credibility of a random YouTube video can be very questionable, so I personally have gone into the description of that video to look at the sources, and I've checked all of them, and I've gone through my own sources with the Department of Juvenile Crime Prevention, and everything that he says in the video is true. So many people say that whenever the children play these violent video games, it leads to them becoming more violent. But as the data shows that since the popularity of violent video games like Mortal Kombat, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, things like that, since those games became popular in the late 90s, the youth crime rate in America has actually steadily gone down, even by over 20%. So this statistic relates back to the point I made earlier about video games being a way to de-stress, not a means of creating violence. So how can video games be making our children violent if the juvenile crime rate has been steadily going down? My third point of research on this topic is that video games can actually help your mental health. Although some people try and say that playing video games makes you a violent person, scientific research has actually shown that playing video games can actually help your mental health. This statement is supported by a study from the University of California, which surveyed college students, and they said that when playing video games, they were significantly less stressed than when they were doing other activities. This study shows that contrary to popular belief, that video games can de-stress you and reduce your negative emotions, not bring them up. Speaking from personal experience, I can say that I myself have experienced this. There's been many times where I was at school or work and I was very stressed, and whenever I came home, playing video games de-stressed me majorly. And I've talked to many of my friends who have said the same thing, that whenever they would be at school or they would go to work and they'd have long, hard days, they came home and playing these video games majorly de-stressed them, because it's not a violent activity, it's an activity that's just made for having fun with your friends. So to start wrapping things up, the data clearly does not show a correlation between playing violent video games and having violent behavior. Like as I mentioned earlier, it's made to be an effective way of reducing stress and reducing, the youth crime rate has been going down since the popularity of these violent video games, and most people who play violent video games can separate fantasy from reality. Like as I mentioned earlier, the separation of fantasy and reality shows that the violence is not affecting them on a mental level, The idea that it brings your stress level down shows that it's not making people more violent, it's making them have less stress. And the idea that the crime rate's gone down is showing it's not making our people more violent, it's making them, in fact, less violent. So the next time you hear someone talking about Mortal Kombat, Call of Duty, or Grand Theft Auto, or Fortnite, when the question about what causes violence comes up, the answer can be sure that it's not video games. Thank you.